Pay inequity impacts on home ownership. Pay inequity impacts on the quality of life you can provide for your children. Pay inequity means you can get to retirement or to that age of 65 and not be able to contribute to your community, to your whānau, hapu and iwi in the way that you want to. And this is the bit that is like the ultimate devastating impact of racism, that some of our kaumātua can't afford to be the Māori that they want to be.
E ngā pūioi rau o te tōtara haimata o tō tātou nehe nui, tēnā koutou, nau mai, hara mai, ki tēnei kōnei ipurangi ko Ao Mai Te Rā, te ingoa. Welcome back to Ao Mai Te Rā, our podcast where we talk about racism in all its forms and how we get rid of it. With us today is tino te pairu tēnei, nā mihi nui ki a koe, Ngāti Porou, Rākai Pāka, Ngāti Kahungunu, ko Dr. Kathy Irwin tēnei. Nā mihi nui, e hoa. Racism, in your experience across so many aspects of health and education, what are the stories that come forward today?
O tuatahi, e te marae kura, tēnā koe mō tō mahi, tō moimoia, mō ngā rangatahi o Aotearoa, tēnā koe. I think what I want to do as the opening salvo is to start in joy.
Ka pai.
And I want to start in joy because so much of what we've had to endure as a people, as a whānau, myself personally, has been so horrible that people probably wouldn't believe it if you told it to them all strung together as a series of examples and case studies. I'm hoping they do believe it because I am writing the book. I don't want to leave this earth carrying these stories, but I do want to start in joy, and that is a graduation ceremony at Harvard University in America in 2014, where a young woman enabled the kupu Ngāti Porou, Rākai Pāka and Ngāti Kahungunu to be in the graduation book of that esteemed institution. And that was possible, in my view, because exactly 100 years earlier, her great-grandmother, also named Horiana, sixth in a family of 19, a very strong Mormon whānau in Nuhaka, met some women who came to Nuhaka with the Presbyterian Church. My sense of that meeting was that she saw a church which sent the women in the leadership roles, and they talked about a secondary school in Turikina that they had been running since 1905. And she had already decided that education was going to be her pathway to the future she saw for herself. It was a future the Crown, of course, didn't see. The policy, girls can do anything, is a 1980s policy. This was 1914. The prospect of secondary education for rurally located Māori was a 1940s innovation that Cyril Beebe tried to get off the ground. This was 1914. Apirana Ngata, one of our Ngāti Porou tribal leaders and of course a great statesman for New Zealand, in the 1940s wrote the fabulous whakatauaki e tipu e rea, that the future is to be gained through mastery in both cultures, never sacrificing our ancestral heritage for the modern world, but becoming champions of both. He wrote that in the autograph book of Sir John Bennett's daughter, Sir John Bennett, former chair of the Māori Education Foundation and my Standard 2 teacher. That is a whakatauaki that is still held in high regard in New Zealand. He wrote that in the 40s. My grandmother made these decisions in 1914. So when I'm sitting at Harvard University having tea in a garden party setting, of course my mihi is to her. When she was a child, her name, born in 1899, her name was turned into hoary, to smelly, to all sorts of derogatory labels, such that she didn't like it. So she named none of her children after her, none of her grandchildren, although the church that she worked in, many people were named after her. So when I became pregnant in 1986, I went to her because I knew that I wanted my girl to have her name. And we had to go as a whole whānau. My sister did the bid, had to get the pitch ready, because we had to convince her that the future was going to be a future in which hōriana would be a beautiful thing, and in which the vision of the treaty, I'm really trying not to cry, in which the vision of the Treaty of Waitangi, which she dedicated her life to living, would be something that this young hōriana could take for granted. Mercifully, she believed us, because I'd secretly actually already registered the name, which is a non-Presbyterian thing to do. And of course, at Harvard, exactly 100 years later, tell me that's a coincidence. 4 generations it took us to go from Nuhaka to Harvard, and the thesis that was presented for that graduation explores how mātauranga Māori can inform regulatory reform in the resource management space. I've read the examiner's report of that thesis, because that's the kind of mother I am. And what the examiner identified was that, firstly, the thesis satisfied all of the rigour of what Harvard offers. But then he has a paragraph which I absolutely love as an educationist, because it's the work that I've dedicated my life to doing through university courses and teaching. And that is, he talks about this scholarship being of a different kind, that there is something else, not only in this body of knowledge, but in the way in which it has been articulated and the kind of futures that it points to, that he was astounded by. Ko tēnā te wairua o mātauranga Māori. And, let's be clear. We don't need Harvard University to validate mātauranga Māori. But you know what? Just every now and then, it doesn't hurt for somebody like that to be in a position of understanding this world profoundly, having no knowledge of this world, and being able to make those comments about what he was able to see. So it was a fabulous time. You have to start in the joy, because through all of the generations of our exposure to colonisation in Aotearoa, the Māori cultural infrastructure that the colonising powers of Aotearoa has never been able to crush has been in plain sight of them all the time. And that's what I love about narrative stories. At the moment, people talk about McDonald's having a very negative impact on children's health and on obesity levels in children in New Zealand, and of course it does. I take my mokopuna there once a week, only once, and I manage what he eats. But I do take him there. There's only 167 McDonald's franchises in New Zealand. There's over 750 marae. Now, if people think 167 franchises can have such a negative effect, might not the over 750 marae have a positive effect if only we could harness them in the public policy space in a way that was actually mana enhancing and connected with the Māori cultural infrastructure that you and I live every day of our life in plain sight of this whole machinery of government system that ignores it, pops in every now and then. So my grandmother grew up in that Māori cultural infrastructure. She's a native speaker of Māori, tikanga is her first worldview in a very large whānau. And she took that knowledge all the way through her life. So ducks at Turakina in 1917, posted to her first teaching position in 1918. She was posted to Waiōhau. So you have a young Ngāti Porou Rākau Pāka woman in the middle of Waiōhau in 1918. I'd have liked to have been in some of those conversations. And a young man from the Orkney Islands who had come out here with his father, John Lawton, when he was a child. His mother had died in the Orkneys before they came. Had dedicated his life to being of service to the Māori community through the Presbyterian Church. And in his dedication, had made it his business to become a fluent speaker of Te Reo and to live the tikanga of our people, because that was his dedicated mission. He's posted to Mongopohatu in 1918. Becomes a lifelong friend and confidant of Ruakinana, the only non-Māori to officiate at his tangi at Rua's behest. So he's in Mongopohatu, she's in Waiōhau, both in the Presbyterian Māori Mission Service. And interestingly, we have a journal account of their first meeting because one of the Presbyterian sisters, who was a colleague of Grandma's, talked about an event, and it just so happened they were both at it, and it just so happened that she talked about their meeting. So, you know, how wonderful is a whānau to have some of those early insights. Long story short, 1921 they marry and begin a lifelong contribution. And this is my description of it, because I understand, and my grandmother counselled me on this very strictly, that the old man's life was in service of his faith. Actually, their collective impact on Aotearoa was much bigger than their faith, because when the Māori Bible Committee was put together in the 50s to revise and to bring out a new version, Apirana Ngata sat on that committee, the head Māori of all the churches in Aotearoa sat on that committee, and Sir Apirana asked my grandfather to chair it. I don't think you get asked to do that if your commitment to the reo is somehow wewi wawa. And so through their life, they championed Turakina and made sure lots of girls were sent there. Peti Nohotima, a wonderful tūhoe educator, is one such woman who, when I met her, she said, I know all about you. Your grandmother made sure I got to Turakina. I'm not sure Peti was too happy about that in the early stages, but, you know, she's a fabulous teacher, educator, and she talked about the role of my grandparents were on the board of Turakina for many years. One of the hostels was named the Lawton Hostel. But they, in their work with the Presbyterian Church, developed a way of saying to the church with a group of others, if you want Māori to become Presbyterians, they will want to worship in the reo, their own reo. They will want to worship in ways that are about tekanga Māori. And so they created a parallel synod in the Presbyterian Church in 1947. So we talk about transformational development in organisations these days as if the current climate of Māori development is the most kind of cutting edge. This was 1947. They opened a marae at Ohope, dedicated as the National Presbyterian Marae, so that the church could see what worship from Te Ao Māori looks like. They wrote a Māori service book. They wrote himene. They required the Presbyterian Church to come into Te Ao Māori rather than the other way around. That modelling is modelling that some agencies today are still trying to come to terms with. Because what it was fundamentally about was being able to say, the treaty offers this country, and remember we signed in 1840, our tipuna signed up to something that it didn't exist anywhere in the world. And we signed with vision, we signed with courage, we signed with heart, and we said, we're up to this. And generation after generation of our people have held to that. And so when I look back across the many people who were underwhelmed by my presence, who actively tried to make sure that I never amounted to what my grandmother saw for all of her mokopuna. Their vision and their example, and all of the other kaumātua like them, fighting actively to create change, is the inspiration that enables me every day of my life to say to myself, aha, ko te mamai o ngā whawhai. Ka paupau, taku ngākau. Mo te moimoi au taku tipuna, taku tipuna wahine, mai hori ana, taku tipuna karaua, papa, and to not be put off, because that's the point. That's the point. The faces of racism are actually designed to put us off our trajectory, which is the ability to live as Māori in the modern world with the grace and the elegance and the mana that is our birthright. All of this other stuff that is at the structural level, at the organisational level, and at the personal, interpersonal level, the machinery of racism in Aotearoa, and there was no accident in how it was created. The pen in Aotearoa has been far more devastating in its impact on our people than the musket. Forgive me, I understand that what I'm saying speaks to our lives that were sacrificed in those wars, from my ancestors as well. But what that pen did across more than 170 years was just signed away and signed away and signed away and signed away our rights as tangata whenua and treaty partners in Aotearoa. What we see in a modern world, and just recently, even last year with the passing of the Public Service Act, and we can go back through legislation in some significant places. Public Service Act, in my view, 2020, Waitangi Tribunal 1985, Waitangi Tribunal Act 1975. Small examples of the Crown atoning for the writing of colonisation into the machinery of government. So my work is focused on holding the public policy, the machinery of government, to account for the ways in which racism has been built into the structures of this country, because that's why many Pākehā people and many non-Māori people don't see it, because it's in the very institutions that they are served by, that they work for. And Donna Awatere, who's written many things that are absolutely fantastic, I think I'm one of the presidents of her fan club, in Māori Sovereignty, which she published in 1984, talks about the invisible curriculum and identifies that it's only invisible to the people who wrote it, because the people who it was not designed for see it in plain sight everywhere. And that's certainly been my case. You know, I started in joy, and I want to start in joy because we have a right to be a joyous people. You know, at a pō whakangaho, there is nothing like singing 5 Ngāti Porou Waiata on a trot. Just nothing. I'm sorry, aroha mai. Other iwi might feel the same too. But that's our right, you know? And it has to be experienced so that it's the balance to all this other stuff we have to put up with. You know, people say to me, wow, you know, you're still going on about those things. I said, yeah, you know, shit's still happening. And we need to be standing up. I did not karanga a mokopuna into this world to say to him, yo, bro, you're on your own, you know. Nanny's done for a bit. I promised that mokopuna when I called him into the world that I would be there for him and that I would be there for everyone else as well. You call it payback, you call it pay forward, don't care what you want to call it. It's about representing. And you know, when I go back through just my secondary school, because I was very lucky, my father was my primary school principal. At the 2 primary schools I went to, no one messed with me at primary school. No one. My mother, in the education system at the time, schools used to have a position called senior woman, and that was the education system's way of, because most of the principals were men, of trying to build an infrastructure in schooling so that women could come through with career trajectories that pointed them to the principal role. My mother was the senior woman in the 2 primary schools I went to. No one messed with me. Mind you, I couldn't have friends around to play after school either because Mum and Dad didn't want kids that, didn't always have as many friends at home in primary school. Yeah, the swings and roundabouts. But when I got to high school, so we're talking 1969, streaming everywhere. So I'm the only Māori girl in the top class. And one of the things that you had to do in the 3rd form was a speech. Compulsory across the whole 3rd form. And I went home to Mum and Dad and I said, we've got to do a speech. And they said, oh yeah, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And thank God, and I actually mean that with real solemnity, my mother said to me, why don't you do a speech on Papa? So I didn't know who Papa was, except that I knew him as Papa. And then I started to research his story and, the Māori Bible Committee chair, member of the Journal of the Polynesian Society editorial board, the accolades are just all there, sitting in the history. First moderator of the Māori Synod of the Presbyterian Church, moderator of the Presbyterian Church of New Zealand, who's this man that I knew was the most lovely, gentle, caring man. Anyway, so into research mode I go, finding out all this stuff. So I do the research for it. Now, my father is a Pākehā Scotsman. Pākehā Scotsman, who's a Catholic, marries a Māori Presbyterian. For South Island, North Island, you kind of couldn't get much more sort of diversity. But he had already decided as a young Pākehā teacher to teach in the native school system before he met my mother. That's where they met. So there's things about my father that were already dedicated, like my grandfather, already dedicated to creating the Aotearoa that the treaty offers us. That was also his professional choice. So I wrote the speech and then he said to me, right, now I'm going to teach you how to deliver it. And I said to him, what are you talking about? I stand up and read it. He said, no. There's a big difference between delivering a speech and being an orator. Well, okay. Hours and hours and hours of training for this one speech on my stance, on how to hold myself before I open my mouth, on how to move through delivery, on how to pause and wait and hold for effect. It was what actually happened after it is I went into musical comedy. I ended up in The King and I, in Yeoman of the Guard, in West Side Story, because I ended up having a love for acting from what my father was teaching me about oratory. Anyway, so I go to do the speech, and what he said is, right at the end, this was the most dramatic, my father was extremely dramatic, right at the end, you have to say, and how do I know these intimate details? Pause, hold, 1, 2, 3, which is a really long time when you're sitting in front of the whole 3rd form of Hastings Girls High School. Quite simply, he was my grandfather, and burst into tears. A total emotional mess, kind of sneak off the stage, won first prize. And kind of got a taste for debating, so joined the debating club the next year, and then went into the Koremako speech competitions every year thereafter, and my main rival in Hastings was Numia Timona. Now, of course, the wonderful Reverend Numia Timona, younger sister of our tribal chair, Ngahiwi Timona, and she was at Karamu High School, I was at Hastings Girls, Dad always said to me, she's the one to beat. Koe he taonga, koe te tauira. So I always had this little thing with Numi, and we're great friends today. So what would happen through that process is probably really the ugliest faces of racism, apart from what streaming did, separating me out from everyone else. So I was the only girl in the academic stream in kapahaka, all that sort of stuff, was that when you win a speech and Hastings Girls High School gets some mention in the newspaper, you get to do the speech in the high school, in assembly. And then go back to class past teachers who are saying things, and I have the geography teacher's face in my mind now, saying things like, "You seriously don't believe that crap you just spouted up there, do you?" I am a young 15-year-old at Hastings Girls High School. I've just won the regional competitions. And I guess when I look back on that as well, what it meant was that my adolescence was, deeply connected to researching social issues and economic impact and historical factors. I went round the back of the bike yards a little bit, but not so much because my parents were pretty strict. Made up for that later. But I had a young adolescence that Freya would identify as really about conscientisation. That was my adolescence. And by the time I got to the sixth form, all of that stuff around there, I stayed in my lane. And my lane was my ancestral love. My lane was my own people who had done things decades before government policy said this is what we might do for and with Māori. They just went out and did it and paved a path that we could follow. So get to the sixth form, do my thing, get to the seventh form. So there's only 4 house captains at Hastings Girls High and they're voted by the kids. I was one, the only Māori house captain of Greenhouse. We were the best singers, just FYI. Small group of prefects in the school voted by staff and pupils. I was one. There were 2 Māori prefects. I was one of those 2. I'd got 6 subjects in School C. I'd got UE accredited. I wasn't your top SWAT, but I did my thing. Debating all the way through. Did King and I, West Side Story, Alistair Ferris, and MFAT was my father in the King and I. I was the girl who read the letter to Mrs. Anna. Yeoman of the Guard when I went to Teachers College. And through my senior secondary, what I didn't know, that my mother was dying of breast cancer. And I sort of knew something was wrong because I had to go and live with some people in the sixth form while she went to Osenham House. But I didn't really know. And when she came back, the narrative was she's doing well and everything's fine, and I kept getting on with things. So you've got all of this stuff going on at home, doing your best at school. And, I said to my parents, the principal really doesn't like me. She doesn't. I seem to speak too loud. I seem to sing too much. I seem to, bounce off the walls with this energy that comes from Ngāti Porou and Rākai Pāka. And I thought this is what life was really supposed to be about. Mm-hmm. But no, and mid-year in the seventh form I get my first report, and where the principal was allowed to make a comment, she had written, Kathleen has become a keen and worthwhile prefect. And she must have written that and thought, oh no, I can't do it. So she got, you remember those rubbers that had the grey part at the end that you could rub pen out with?
Yeah.
So she rubbed the words out, has become. So there's a hole, right? There's a hole where she rubbed them out. She didn't even didn't even have the grace to redo the report. Leaves a hole in it and said, is becoming a keen and worthwhile prefect. I thought, oh, well, I'll take that. Get to the end of the seventh form, a couple of things had happened. There could have been alcohol at the school dance, not brought in by the women prefects, brought in from Napier Boys High who nearly got us expelled because I think there was a lot of vodka in the punch. Anyway, a few issues like that, but, we managed it as prefects and kind of cleaned up what was a harmless prank. Seriously, the Napier Boys High prefects thought it'd be great to spike the Hastings Girls High punch at the dance. Not a big thing. Get to the end of the seventh form, and that I didn't think was a real biggie. So after all of that, and it's not an exemplary 5 years at high school, but it wasn't bad. So the final comment from the principal, and I still have these reports, for some reason, the memorabilia of the different forms of racism that were the faces of racism for me personally, I've got in a little box. So the final year at high school, I have this report where the principal's comment is, after those things that I've done, Kathleen is a keen and pleasant singer. Now you see, that wasn't even accurate, because I think this is how it must have gone now. I think when Mum was first diagnosed with breast cancer, they tried to put something in place to create some space for me away from what Mum and Dad were dealing with. And so they offered me the chance, 2 options in the 7th form, either to go to St Cuthbert's Girls' School in Auckland for a finishing year, or to have singing lessons with Gerda Pons, who was the retired leading soprano of the Netherlands State Opera Company, who lived in Hastings, her husband owned the Mayfair Hotel and various other properties. Well, of course, I took the singing, not knowing what I think Mum and Dad needed. Anyway, so, kaore tēnā he kōrero whakahihi, although it is going to sound like that, I actually wasn't a keen and pleasant singer. I was studying to be an opera singer. She couldn't even say she's a hot singer, She has to just say keen and pleasant. And at the end of the 7th form, Gerda wanted me to go to London, and she wanted to support me to go and train and to become a full-time opera singer. So when that principal says, you're a keen and pleasant singer, and this woman wants to send me to London, and it had caused a huge fight with my parents because I wanted to go. I had a place at Teachers College and I wanted to go. And they wouldn't let me. So massive fight between my parents. That report could have been enough for me to walk out on my whānau, to get on a plane to London, when actually what happened is, within a short period of time, about 15 months, we had lost Mum. So mercifully, I stayed in Aotearoa, but that report could have been the thing that made me just say, that's it, I'm out, I'm done. And through my professional career, those sorts of nasty, and I consider them to be blatant racism, absolute examples of blatant racism, followed me in my career. At the end of Teachers College, when we went through Teachers College in those days, we were able to do part-time university studies simultaneously. So I did a B.Ed through my teacher's training, and after that 3-year diploma training, we got a year on pay, but full pay from the government, through a bursary, to finish our degrees. And then I was dating a guy at the time whose brother had done another year and done honours. And his partner, we were all at Teachers College, his partner said to me, God, if he can get honours, you can. And I said, okay. So I started to ask about the possibility of doing honours. You'd have thought I was burning down civilization as mankind knew it. Mm-hmm. I had the head of our teacher education program at the Teachers College, whose name I won't reveal, say to me, but do you realise that if you are successful, you could enter the higher echelons of education? As if I was a little whatever for whom that was not just an outrageous proposition. He was speaking as if he had a little bit of tutai just under his nose. And I thought, okay, I gotcha. So we're not going to go there. I just said, I'm simply asking if it's possible that I can apply. I then had to go and see the Dean of Education at Massey, who was Professor Clem Hill, an absolutely magnificent educator who treated me quite differently. And he asked me the why question. He asked me whether I was prepared for the rigour of that 1 year. I said I felt I was. He said, will you get first class? And I said, well, I'll do everything I can to achieve that, because that's our ancestral whakaaro. You don't find the smallest hill that you hope you can climb up. The encouragement is to find the loftiest mountain.
Kia ora.
And for that to be the aspirational goal. So into this honours class I go, youngest, class of 43, youngest, most of them are principals. I'm sitting down the back, never been an experienced classroom teacher because I was still training. Sat down the back, assuming I was the thickest in the room because everyone else spoke as if I was, and just took the notes, did my own homework. By that stage, I was already an internationally qualified netball referee. I'd done all my badges coming through, local, regional, and you know, had them all there. My Saturdays were all in umpiring netball. I gave all of that away because I knew what the honours course would take. And you know, the local netball community said, oh, but you know, you're the youngest, you're the fittest, you keep up with everybody, we need you. I said, no, got to go. So I made some big sacrifices and I just did the business. And I think because I sat down the back and assumed that I wasn't the brightest and that I knew very little, I listened to what the lecturers were sharing. And of course, in those days, what the lecturers wanted in the assignments was for you to tell them what they'd just told you. So I got all the notes.
Koia.
Yeah. So, you know, 43 in the class, 3 people get first class honours. I'm one of them. To the absolute disdain of the other members of the class. So off you go. Go into teaching, teach in the local intermediate for 2 years. A small group of Māori teachers, we Kaipuke, Nihi Hauia and myself, who run most of the school sport, the school kapahaka, you know, all of the things where our kids are. That's where we are. My Saturdays taking the kids to netball, I had a little old dungy car and about 7 kids in it. ACC would have a fit if they knew now, because that's what we did. And I was there one day and somebody who was a colleague said to me, hey, there's a junior lectureship in Māori education offered at Massey, where I'd done my first degree and my honours. And I said, oh, shut the front door, you're joking. Anyway, saw it. She gave me, you know, one of those mighty pads and said, write an application, I've got the stamp, I'm going to post it. So we're laughing in the stomach, poke it off, got the position. So led to an academic career in which my job would be to create new innovation for our people all the way through. I was a junior lecturer in 1981, aged about 23. And then met the face of people who would say things like, so I did a master's degree while I was teaching, went on to do a PhD at Vic after I'd left Massey, but had people who, on the one hand, were extremely brilliant in their fields and known for their expertise in Māori education, say things to me like, you don't need to worry about a PhD. You know, for the kind of work that you're likely to do, it's just not going to be necessary. That kind of stuff. A supervisor who, you know, to be absolutely frank, I hadn't realised had a sexual agenda through my supervision until he advised me to take the literature review out of my master's thesis before I submitted it. Just seemed odd. So, of course, I submitted it and failed because it didn't have a literature review. Wow. But what I did in the assessment process was I submitted it to the New Zealand Journal of Educational Studies and got it published, which is the most prestigious educational journal in New Zealand. So I knew the writing was okay because it got accepted straight away and it was published straight away. So I knew the writing was okay. Research must have been okay. And then when the examiner's report came back, a friend of mine, who was one of the first working class women to get a PhD at Massey in education, sat me down and she said, right, I'm going to shadow you as you go through the next part because there's something wrong here and there's another agenda at play. So she shadowed me as I resubmitted. I resubmitted, I think, on a Tuesday at 5 o'clock. My son was born the next day, so touch and go. Got through and then got the new job at Vic, and at my leaving party, said supervisor comes up to me and says, of course, all I have to do is fail your thesis again and you won't be going anywhere. This is a very, very well-known international scholar in our field. And of course you have to be able to hand over to the tipuna and just trust that things are going to happen. Got to Vic, had a fabulous experience, have done things like write new courses in Māori education at Vic. Just enable our people to come into the university environment, see themselves, find themselves. Many of them said to me, you are the first Māori woman tenured academic we have ever been lectured by. To have in my courses an absolute foundation of mana wahine, so that there's no sense that the influence of patriarchy, which is a very Western thing, can disrupt us in our journeys forward. And I had a fabulous young student in my second year, Hone McGregor, who's now director of Wakatu Incorporation, an absolutely fabulous Māori leader. In the mihi process to that class, stood up and said, well, the word is you have to be a feminist in this class to get an A. And I just want to know, is that the deal or what? The class absolutely erupted. And I said, well, you do the work and you get the A. Of course, he got an A+ because it's absolutely outstanding. And I think pretty determined to make sure that, that a Māori man got that accolade. But we just had so much fun as our people were able to take up what was their right within academia. And that is to be their absolutely brilliant, genius selves, devoid of the layers of racism that they had experienced coming through the schooling system to that point. Lots of mature students came in. I had one person who I gave an A+ to at the postgraduate level, who was really grateful, and then went away and in another paper got an A+ in geography and came back and said to me, I've got an A+. And I said, I know that. I gave you one. She said, no, I've got a real one. And I wanted to slap her. And I said, kare, what? What? And we laughed, and then we had a kind of conversation. So the racism that colonisation has written into the scripts of our lives goes so deep that even when we're in a Māori environment, with Māori people, in kaupapa Māori, every now and then those old triggers can come back. Is she really qualified to know what an A+ is in a mainstream university? Is she? So you have to just keep the shining star of your own whakapapa, of your own trajectory, of your own descent lines, guiding you through all of this maze, through all of this stuff. We took all sorts of things through Vic. The first group-based assessment policy at Vic we fought with Māori studies and women's studies, so that it might be possible for learning to occur in a way other than as an individual enterprise, all that stuff. So where does it play out long term? Currently I'm the kaihotu, the Director of Māori Development at Te Ara Ahonga Order, the Retirement Commission. And I am there because the cumulative effect of racism on our people hits in older age when people don't have KiwiSaver, they don't have 4.5 million accrued and invested, because policy has channeled them into the poor paying jobs and into the semi-skilled and unskilled sector of the labour market, unless they had people who fought to get them out of that trajectory. But that was the Crown's predominant policy trajectory in education for decades. So that, and this is what I said in my interview, if 7 times naught equals naught, you have nothing left over each day to save for retirement, because you might be barely able to feed your children. You certainly aren't a homeowner, and you won't have had the opportunity in life to feel so good about who you are that good health is your default mechanism. You know? So I'm at the Retirement Commission because that office has the statutory responsibility to advise the government on retirement income policy. I am in there asking, he hata kaupapa, mō ngai Māori? How does the structural inequity that accumulates across a person's life land in retirement, and what is our statutory responsibility and opportunity to advise the government on what to do with that? We die at a younger age. By leaving the coast, I was born in Waipiro Bay, by leaving the coast, my parents increased my life chances by 12 years, just by leaving the coast. And those stats in Māori Health were published in the Ngāti Porou annual report, and they have looked at all the statistical indicators at an iwi level for our people. Just by leaving the coast, your life expectancy increases by 12 years. That is utterly appalling.
It's horrifying, isn't it?
That is utterly appalling.
Horrifying.
So I'm at the Retirement Commission saying, what are we going to do about this? So my big project, which got signed off at Christmas, is what does retirement look like for Māori? Now, I know people have already said to me, Kare, retirement's not even kaupapa Māori. I said, I know that. But at some point, the Crown makes a decision to provide you with superannuation. Are we sure that we're getting a fair deal? So Dame Tariana Turia, another one of my wahine tō sheroes, said many years ago, should Māori be able to access super earlier on the grounds of the impact of racism collectively through their lives? If not super earlier, should they be able to access KiwiSaver if they're lucky enough to have it earlier, to be able to provide for their later life, to prepare to provide for what is in many cases a shorter life? So she made those big policy pitches many years ago. I'm in there saying, he hata kaupapa, I tēnei rā. What are we going to do with that today? And that's kind of where I'm at the moment, that I love that people expect me to ask that question. Nobody expects me to go into a role like that and to say, I'm here to pretty up the system and to make things look good. And that's what intergenerational activism gives you. People know these whānau lines, they are honouring the treaty, they are challenging the racism that is systematic at organisational levels, you know, in the public service, where the Crown has an opportunity to push the settings and the levers to get things right. The pay inequity in the public service, on average for Māori women, is $20,000 less than for Pākehā men. $20,000 in the public service where there is some control. In the university system, a piece of research has just come out that shows that for Māori and Pacific women over the course of an academic career, and I was one of those career academic women, the loss that Māori and Pacific women academics will face is $250,000 less than their Pākehā colleagues across the life of their careers. $250,000. Pay inequity impacts on home ownership. Pay inequity impacts on the quality of life you can provide for your children. Pay inequity means you can get to retirement or to that age of 65 and not be able to contribute to your community, to your whānau, hapu and iwi in the way that you want to. And this is the bit that is like the ultimate devastating impact of racism, that some of our kaumātua can't afford to be the Māori that they want to be. So who pays? Everybody wants the kaumātua at this hui. Who pays their petrol to get there? Everybody wants those kaumātua to be present when the Crown negotiations are happening. The lawyers are all paid, the public servants are all paid. Who's putting the groceries into the cupboards of the 10 karaua and kuia who are holding that pie every single day so that justice can be done? Who's doing that? No one is. You know? So we have got some massive issues to face to make sure, and this is one of the concepts that I'm putting into this report, what does retirement look like for Māori? There are many people for whom retirement is about the benefits of compound interest on their money. You put some money away, and over a 40-year period, it doesn't grow like that. Compound interest means it grows like that. Okay, that's great, if you've got surplus income. If you haven't, then the parallel concept I'm putting into the report is what too many of our people experience is the compound impact of racism. From birth, through childhood, through adolescence, through early adulthood, through later adulthood. And I've found a whole range of studies, gold standard studies, none of which anyone I know has written, so I can't be accused of just bringing my mates in, which track the impact of the ugly face of racism. And the first is a study of babies who are born prematurely, where the researchers found that the medical staff intervene most effectively with Pākehā babies, and then there's a hierarchy of intervention impact. And Māori babies are down the bottom. Premature babies, that's where the ugly face of racism starts to appear. And then you see all sorts of things across a life course, such that by the time people get to 65, who has actually had a chance to be the fabulously brilliant person that their whakapapa gives them the right to be? And I'm meaning brilliance in mana ake terms. I'm not meaning everyone has to be, Jason Momoa, or everyone has to be Denzel Washington. I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning that our people don't even have the same opportunity to be who they were born to be. And the last story I want to share, because it had a profound effect on me. So I'm a young junior lecturer at Massey, and I was seeing a young person from the Bay of Plenty whose parents had worked at the mill. So everybody in the Bay of Plenty, everybody in Kawerau, went and worked at the mill. Big money. Shift work, big money. It was the future that, a lot of Māori were employed by. Of course, it's gone now.
Yeah.
But this was, the early 80s. And he was driving me back to the airport in Rotorua. And, we kind of had a couple of dates. And he said to me, what do you do in your course? What do you do in your courses? Because they're called Māori education, aren't they? I said, yeah. He's a lawyer now. I said, he was working at the mill at the time. He got a chance to go to Teachers College and went to the mill for a whole lot of reasons that other young people made the choices about too. And so I basically told him the course outline. We do structural analysis, we do history, there's an hour between Kawerau and Rotorua for me to give the complete lecture and overview of the course.
Oh, no.
Here's a big man, and he is driving along, and tears are just rolling out his eyes. And I will never forget those tears, because he looked at me and he just said, I knew, but I didn't know how to put the words on it. And that's the case for so many of our people who, in the pit of their puku, know that the ugly faces of racism are structurally determined and designed. They are organisationally supported and resourced, and at an individual level, we are supposed to push all of that away and break through in the beautiful mana that our birthright suggests we should be able to do. So there's a lot of work to challenge the structural racism and systemic racism, and more people in the public policy space get that now, including the government. There is still lots of work to do in the organisational space, because too many people have accrued personal privilege and power off the back of colonisation, and they're not aware of it. Recently, the professor of politics at Massey University has written an article, an absolutely fabulous article, showing how his own whānau personally benefited from colonisation, and specifically the pāhua of Parihaka.
Oh.
Very, very powerful piece. And there's one sentence where he says, in one generation, his great-grandfather went from landless Irish peasant to landed gentry and landowner in Aotearoa in one generation. So when people say, colonisation and the accrual of privilege, it's a bit nebulous. It ain't nebulous at all. It is very materially grounded. And I sent him a message straight away, thanking him for the article on LinkedIn, private message, and he came back and said, well, you're one of the few people who's written me that kind of response. Turns out I work with his uncle at Massey. I said, your uncle's not Brian, because that's New Zealand. But that is the deal, that colonisation has resulted in the material dislocation of our people from what we rightfully should be able to resource. But it's also created too many situations where the machinery of government itself is locked into a colonial mode. So one of the chapters of my What Does Retirement Look Like for Maori paper is the decolonisation of public policy. And I'd imagine that that's going to give some people some things to think about.
Ka pai.
But there you go.
Anei taku mihi I roto i ngā roimata ki a koe e whaia. Thank you so much for mapping out in such personal detail your stories, your journeys that illustrate so eloquently what racism means and how it affects our health and well-being in Aotearoa. E te whānau, this is a big kaupapa, such an important kaupapa for all of us to reflect on in our own whānau, in our own whakapapa. And if you'd like to know more about it, have a look at our website. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.